It's 8:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started. In accordance with our board policy 1.400, this special call meeting for the purpose of discussing and formulating a proposal for the building located at 775 Reader Drive will come to order. Thank you, board members and Dr. Dyer, for being flexible and adjusting your schedules for this meeting. We wouldn't be able to do this without your flexibility. As chairman of the Cleveland City School Board of Education, we're committed to running an orderly and efficient meeting, treating everyone with respect. Board members will be provided, like we've said previously, equal voice and should communicate through the director of schools for addressing his staff. And then also I want to mention, because we do have public in the room, our policies can be found on the clevelandschools.org website. When there, click menu and select Policy Manual under the Board of Education section. Our meetings are not public forums. However, the board has made accommodations for you to address the board via any meeting that we have, via School Board Policy 1.404, which has the requirements listed. And so from this point forward, all discussion will remain within this meeting, should be limited to the building on 775 Reader Drive. And at this time, you guys have received the information from Cleveland City Schools, and so we'll open it up for discussion from board members.
I'll jump in. I think one of my questions has been what exactly we are to be voting on today. What is it that the City Council has requested us to give our input on? And personally, if the input is, do we have an interest in the property? Yes. Do we have this? Yes. Are they asking us to make financial commitments? And I think that discussion would be different personally. And so my first question would be that. What are we being asked to commit to or to give a vote on?
Well, from my talks with Fivus and others, the Board of Education has never taken a formal position on Reader Drive. We've never had a board meeting or an agenda item on a board meeting to actually have a discussion. I've had individual discussions with all of you at some point about the building, but I think that's the first step for today. Does the Board of Education as a group have a desire for our board to take an action showing that we do have support for gaining or obtaining Reader Drive, 775 Reader Drive, if the City Council approves a contract to do so. So I think that is one point we have to discuss today. From the last City Council meeting, there was a discussion back and forth on the figure that was out there, $759,000 and change. That was on the original, or on the document from Forrest Preston and his group to the City Council, but there was no contract at that point. So I think where we stand right now is at Monday's meeting of the City Council, the desire was to bring back a signed contract from that group that then the City Council can approve. There was a motion that was sent to the City Council for the school board to make a formal recommendation based on what is it you want to do. Do we want to continue that negotiation with the City Council? Are we open to occupying that building and taking it over for our needs? What's your desire?
Are we being asked to make a financial commitment?
I think at that meeting of the City Council, it may very well come to us being questioned on whether we're willing to step up to the plate and make that happen. So, for example, if the City Council does approve that contract and there's a dollar amount there, that $759,000 figure, I need to be able, if it's me at the podium, to be able to say to the City Council, the board has approved something in that regard. I won't speak for you unless you make a motion to do something with that, because it's not. I can't speak for the board unless you take a vote on a certain item, and that's what I would request that you do. As far as, are you interested in the building itself? And I think you need to have a discussion amongst yourselves about whether you want to put a number on that could accompany that.
I think your first question is, are we interested? I would say definitely. I cannot think of a better location for us for expansion, and there's so many things that we could do with that. And I think it would be good for you to mention some of the things that we've talked about that we would do, with that particular building.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that building has been appraised at a pretty good sum, and we could not build something, for that amount. Not in this day and time.
So you want to review your
glad to.
proposal?
So, in thinking about Raider Drive building, we've had a lot of discussions. Amongst the staff, we've had an opportunity to have a work session with the board, and I tried to take staff discussions, discussion at our work session that we had last week, put that together and come up with an informational sheet that can kind of guide discussion today. So at any point, just stop me if there's a point that the board wants to discuss amongst yourselves, or ask me questions, or we can ask staff questions as well. As far as community impact, we have grown quite a bit since the 70s. This building, I think, was put up in 1977 now. So if you think back to 1977, what Cleveland looked like, what Cleveland City Schools looked like, and then you look at where we are in 2023 now, it is quite different. We do have staff that are now located in 5 different buildings, which, it serves our purpose. We get the job done, but when you think about synergy, when you think about the ease of meeting space, of all those kind of things, it would make, I think, more sense to be in one building. So that's one thing that I would want us to think through and talk about.
I just want to interject that if they came through and looked at this building, some of the offices are no bigger than some of my closets at home. There's just no space at all. They've done a really good job with them, but it's just amazing, how small the offices are. I mean, they couldn't have anyone else in there, only one person at a time.
Right. I think that building provides opportunities with its size for a lot of things. It could really serve as a community hub for a lot of the activities we have in Cleveland. When you think about our students, for example, right now, we don't have a good place. If we wanted to have an art gallery show, or we wanted to bring a small ensemble, you could do that at the schools. But if you wanted to have something as a collective group, say, for example, bring all the elementary art programs together to have an art showcase, that lobby space would be something that would be really nice for that, right next to the greenway. People could walk through, see that, and that could be something that could be kind of neat for that. I think you can see the boardroom space right here. We're tight as is, and we don't have our spotlights or any of the things that we normally have. When you think back to our last board meeting in here with our SROs and others, there's no room. We had people waiting out in the hallways because there was no space in here to actually come in and have a seat and be part of the meeting until that part was over. When you think about enrollment, I think it was maybe earlier this week, part of last week, we had 3 or 4 different families coming through the front doors, and when we're enrolling them, which is something that we do a lot of that here, they're right here at the front table. There's no privacy. It's right in the middle of all the work that's being done here, and that would be nice to have a space dedicated for that down the road. When you think about professional development needs, we have the Denning Center, which is nice to have that space. We have this space, and we can utilize schools when school's not in session, but it would be nice to have dedicated space for large professional development, whether you could chop a room up and bring those accordion-type walls in, or whatever the case may be. When there's a need for providing a lunch or a breakfast, there's no catering space, no type of room for that here. There's no ovens in this building for that. There's just no space to do those kind of things like you would actually need. Projection, sound systems, whiteboard space, flexible furniture, storage. In this building right now, we have 0 storage. The last storage space was taken up because we needed 2 additional office spaces that were back here in this corner. So we have nowhere to store files at this point, really, other than down at the maintenance department. We have, I guess what you call portable trailers that are secure and they're waterproof and they're accessible. But is that really what we want for our filing and for staff to have to go down to a trailer to go inside to really dig through to find what we need to have? That's something I'd like us to think through. I could also at that building envision, a teacher workspace. We've had this in other districts where I came from, where if it's a Saturday and a teacher wanted to come in and have space to do laminating materials or printing of supplies or things like that, I think you could do something like that possibly in a space like we're talking about here. Academic spaces, I'm sorry.
Are those, that particular facility you talked about, is that not available closer to where their classrooms are located, such as housed in their individual?
We do. We have laminating machines and things like that. Some at my other districts where I've been, some of the more expensive equipment, like poster making machines or things like that you may not have at every school, we sort of had a central hub for that. And that's something that we have to talk about and discuss. Is there really a need for that or not? I just threw that out there. Is that something that we could look at as a way of kind of being a central hub where if teachers or others wanted to use that space in that way? So we do have those kind of machines for the most part at each school, but if you wanted to purchase more expensive equipment like maybe a laser cutter or whatever it may be, maybe that's a space you could use that for.
And there is a kitchen over there too that we could access.
There is. I'm sure it needs to be renovated and updated, but there is. Yeah. Academic needs, we need to think this out in more detail. But Cleveland High School is right across the street from this building. I do think there is available space in that building, and of course, as Hal talked about in the work session, when you turn that into a classroom, there are higher state fire marshal requirements that have to be met for that building. But there could be a way to utilize maybe some of that space for academic needs, as well as for school clubs. Right now, for example, SGA, they just meet in classrooms, which is fine. But if you wanted a more professional or better space for the school clubs right across the street to come over and have maybe a little bit better environment for their club meetings, more professional type environment for beta club or those kind of things, that's another use that I could see for that. We've also talked about, a GED center. Right now we do have GED spaces in the community for folks that want to go back to get their GED, but we could possibly look at hosting something like that for the community in that space as well. Family Resource Center, I think, would be a fantastic space there. We have a lot of families that have a lot of needs inside of our school system. I think that's an area that we could house that. We could have possibly translation services or social worker services or other things sort of housed there in some way where families could come by during the workday and have someone to bounce an idea off of or to think through together or whatever the case may be. That's another type of space.
Could you have a medical center over there? Maybe have a nurse there?
Well, that's something that I think we could look at. There are other needs and other considerations. Possibly looking at a health clinic or whatever the case could be. There's all kinds of different ways you could look at that. When I look and think through our human resources department, our business department, when people come in and they're hired here, there's nowhere for them to go and meet privately to walk through all of the enrollment paperwork that has to take place. There's nowhere to have those private meetings when you're ready to retire to come in and have those retirement talks. You're basically meeting in an open space in the back, which I would love to see more privacy for those kind of communications. workers' comp claims and such. So that's the kind of thing that I think I would like to see us look into and how that building space could be used. One thing that has come out is, the need for a break room. We don't have a break room for employees, which in the grand scheme of things, maybe that's not the most important thing in the world, but it is important. We see break rooms at every other business you go to for the most part. There's no space here for that, or the Denning Center. So those kind of needs, operational I'll talk about. We know the traffic flow getting in here in the mornings can be tough, and in the afternoons can be tough. Community needs, I think you could do some sort of community room at that building as well. That would open up. You could have a space for example, if Rotary needed a meeting space one day, that could be a possibility of using a space such as that for Rotary, that had a separate entrance, had a separate bathroom, had access to that kitchen and catering space. I think you could do that, and that way it's kind of a community hub as well. And there could be other things to go into that as well. Switching gears just a little bit, this current space that we are in, of course, right now is office space. If we no longer are in this building, then we don't need this office space. Another use for students possibly is for Yates and Ross Elementary Schools, for Yates Primary and Ross Elementary School. Those two schools right now don't have a stage, they don't have a community room like what we see in our other schools. And, it's nobody's fault, it's just the way those schools were designed. I think, in talking to Hal, we could probably and most likely redesign this building to open up this building for a possible use for those two schools, along with other uses as well. But the primary use for that could be for those students and teachers at those two schools to come and use this in that way. We've also batted around, pre-K center, or there could be other uses of this building as well. But this building still could be very useful to the school system and something that we could convert that wouldn't cost a lot of money to do that.
I want to say one more thing. I'm sorry to keep saying things, but I keep thinking of things. How many of you all have parked over there at that building in that parking lot to go to a football game? I'd say probably everybody in this room. And where would we park? If someone else, had that building and had to use it, they would just close it up for us. But we need that parking space, for football games.
Right. That's a good point as well. The Denning space, if we move to the Raider Drive building, we would no longer need Denning necessarily as office space. We do definitely have a need for that swimming pool to stay open. That's very important for our swim teams, as well as for community swim teams, not just for the high school or middle school, but community swim teams as well. So whatever use of that building down the road, that's something that would be important until maybe another pool at some point is developed in the city for use by those teams. So that's something that would be important. As far as funding is concerned, we do have funds to pay for renovations of this building available now. We have a bond that is out there that we have control of that is built for capital expenses. It's not something that can be used for employee raises. It's not something that can be used for other things. It's one-time expense funds meant for capital expenses, and that's something that would be used to pay for if there's a required payment to the city for that purchase. That could be one piece of it, but also renovating the building. Would that renovate the whole building? That's a discussion we had at the work session. We really don't know until an architect gets in and really draws out what our dream is, what our vision is. But we do have a range. I know Hal Taylor and architects have worked together to look at that, and the range is what we talked about the other day. You could think of $1.2 to $2 million for the renovation of the building, and then $1 million or so as a range for things such as moving walls or paint, carpet, those sort of things. Again, costs are a little bit all over the place right now. We see that in the grocery store, and we also see it in expenses of building projects. Talking to superintendent friends of mine, costs are everywhere right now as far as building goes. But that's what we're looking at. We did talk about utilities as well at the work session. We know that the building does have a chiller for air conditioning purposes. Right now it's electric heat. One of the things that Hal talked about in our meeting the other day was you could purchase a boiler to run in that building, and that would do away with the need for the electric heat. It would get us to more of a system like we're used to, and that would be something that would be an expense up front, but most likely would help in the long run of paying utility bills at a cheaper rate. So that's a lot I know I've just covered. I know you have questions and you have comments and things that you want to discuss, but that sort of sets the table anyway, and then we can go from there. So my hand back over to you.
The purpose of this meeting again is to have discussion, but then also formulate a proposal. So let's flesh out some ideas that you may have, some questions you may have, some concerns, and then we'll go from there.
I've tried to talk to people in my district about this, and most people are very much for it. I think it's a good idea. And I've talked to some teachers, and several of them mentioned they felt like it was important that this building have the ability to occupy students, so that administration and other people see the flow of students through there. So how much more would it cost us beyond this that you mentioned to bring it up to code to where we could have students in the building? Is it going to exceed that amount?
Hal, let me have you address that. I know we're talking ranges right now because we don't have a firm estimate for that. But
when we start talking about students, we start getting into egress becomes an issue. Emergency egress, sprinkler systems have to be looked at much closer. We're already having to change the fire alarm system, so you have to look at redesign on the building and what you can and can't do, and that's going to take more direction than what we want to do with the building to even come up with that. And that's part of the problem as a whole, without knowing what we're doing with the building, but without completely having a plan at this point, is to know where to go with that. Again, can it be used as an assembly? We can use it as an assembly, which if you don't have classroom space, again, the Jones Wrestling Center, the field house, football field houses are assemblies, so you can't have classes in those, but you can have students in those. So there may be things that if we use it for the clubs, or if we use it for something that's not a class, it can be used for other activities, student activities, but maybe not a formal class, an actual class initially. But that's where we would have to determine what we're going to use the building for and come down to a much more intricate plan than what we have now to figure out the cost. And that's what a lot of this is not knowing exactly where we're going with the building. Typically we wouldn't be dealing with that. We would have something in place. We're in an unusual situation this time.
I somewhat like the idea of clubs. Again, we can do whatever the board wants to do, but I think that would be a neat way to use some of that space that we already have for professional development and other pieces, so it wouldn't be necessarily a classroom space you're creating, but we could really, I think, incorporate some of those clubs from the high school and other clubs from other schools too, to come in and use that building space to run meetings, to do induction ceremonies or things like that. I think there could be some neat uses for that, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room in what you're talking about too.
So related to the money part, there's two things that come to mind for me. One is, will this be a money pit? And then two, will we have to raise taxes? And so the first part, or the first issue in my mind that I just mentioned, was addressed via a letter that was sent to the City Council back on January 24th of 2022. And it said the city did their own feasibility study. And one of the things that are mentioned there is, in this letter, the feasibility study demonstrated that the building is in good condition. So that kind of alleviates any issues there for me as far as money pit. However, if we did decide to do this, I think we need to have a commitment that would cover all the costs and taxes would not be raised. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in talking to Hal and talking with Cindy, we've had quite a few staff meetings because I want to make sure the information I give you is truly what we think is correct information. And based on what we're looking at as far as assessment of the funds that we have, we believe that we have enough in those bond funds to renovate the building as much. We believe we have enough funds to renovate it to the point where we can occupy the building, we can have a boardroom, we can do these kind of things that you want to do, where it's been expressed that we want to do. I don't think we would need any extra money to operate the building as far as going back to the city council asking for funds. I don't think there's any need for us to dip into any kind of other expenses that we have to operate the system. I think we can still go through and, if the board wants to do a raise next year for employees and so forth, I think we're still going to be able to do that. Now, just transparency, we're still waiting on the new state funding rules to come down from the state, but based on the early estimates that we have, that we received really last year, we're going to be in good shape as far as operations for making sure that we can buy textbooks, making sure that we can update laptops, making sure we can do all those kind of things that we want to do. And that we always want to do things to support our classrooms, our teachers, and so forth, and our students. So I think, and we think, based on what we've looked at, we're going to be fine as far as operations of the school system without going back to city council or needing to do any kind of increase in taxes or propose that to city council. And we can operate that building, at a reasonable rate to make sure that we're cost efficient. We're one of the most, when we look at utilities across the state in energy, we're one of the best school systems in Tennessee as far as energy efficiency goes. And I think we would want to incorporate that into that new building design as well. We've got good business partners, good energy partners. Cliff Eason and Hal Taylor do a great job of making sure that we understand our needs, that we use technology to shut off the lights or cool and heat the place electronically where people aren't just going over and messing with dials. That saves a lot of money, and that's something we're really good at. We also have, in his department, highly trained, skilled technicians. These aren't just general staff workers. These people know how to operate these chillers, these very technical type of machinery that goes into operating a big school. When we think about a school, the school has the same behind-the-scenes machinery and everything else that a big plant would have. We've talked a lot about that. The same thing would be true in this building. So we wouldn't have to hire out for folks if something went down. We could use his skilled workforce to do that. So I think from a financial point of view that we are going to be okay if the board decides to go down this way.
Excuse me. So one thing I want to, based on what you were saying, one thing I'd want to make sure everybody understands and is comfortable with is that, yes, we'll be able to get it to if we're looking at how much funds we currently have available, I'm perfectly confident that we can establish, if we work with great architects and such that can fill our needs based on the budget that we have, and that we would stay within that budget and be able to do what we can do with that budget. Understanding that it may not accomplish everything on our wish list, and that we would be developing phases in which we could do we can elevate what we're able to do as we are able to do it and plan accordingly when we do our capital planning every year or every year and every 5 years and how often we do it. So I think it's important to understand and make sure everybody's comfortable with it's not going to be the prime jewel of the perfect facility that we might be envisioning it to have the potential for at the very beginning, and that we're comfortable with laying out very specific phases with very specific budgets that we would be able to plan for.
I would say too, Hal, I can't remember the official name for this, but when we do a building project and we put it out to bid, you have alternates. that are part of that. And I think that's what you'd have to do in this building project. You put it out there, these are the things we want, and you have alternate one where we have extra funds. Okay, now we can do these windows, or alternate two, now we can replace this new chiller, or this whatever it may be, and that gives you alternatives too to prioritize. Okay, we have, oh look, we're going to have an extra $400,000. Do you want to spend it to do that or not? So that's out there as well.
And tied to that, and one of the reasons I wanted to point that out is one of the statements on here that I would want to maybe rethink is because we don't know what we're going to be able to do at what phases and what time, I wouldn't be comfortable with the statement currently that says CHS would no longer have a need. I think, or CCS would no longer have a need for the Denning Center. I think it's premature to make that kind of statement. I say that maybe we could no longer need it.
Right.
But I think it's premature because we have no idea at what point we're going to be able to vacate that facility, that it would be unwise to make that assumption at this point.
Well, I'm just wondering if, let's say, we got the building,
Right.
we're there, renovation for this building, would it be considered in that cost? I mean, in that funding?
No, I think what we have to do then is go back and look at our reserves that we have, and we would be able, I think, through that, to do some renovations of this building. Hal, do you want to talk about renovations and what you? I mean, I know we don't have any architect's plans for this yet. You know, we've not gotten that far, but you know, we have walls that would need to come down. We have to build a state. You know, bathrooms would need.
Right.
And we talk about students. Remember, you have to change the fire code system.
Right.
So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we would just look at this again. I think this is 7,000 square feet. Candy's Creek room out there is 6,000. So to give you an idea, if you open this building up, it then would give you an assembly area. If that's what you chose to do, this would give a good assembly area. It could be probably set up a little bit like a theater, like we have at most of the schools for these two. And again, as an assembly, we wouldn't have to go into depth as much as we do when it's a classroom, but we would have to do some things to address fire code in the building so that students could use it and that you could assemble students. We have a lot of egress though in this building, in and out, so I think that would lend itself. You probably would have to do some plumbing updates in the building when you start bringing in a larger number of people, so we probably have to do some bathroom changes. You know, it just depends what you want to do with the building, but this building does loan itself because of the structure and the fact that the roof isn't supported by the interior walls. It loans itself to be renovated in a lot of different ways. So it could be fairly straightforward as far as taking walls out and building it back.
But it appears that we have some funding to do that. And then once everything was going, the maintenance upkeep and the utilities of the new building, would that be an issue? And would maintaining that building take anything away from maintaining our other buildings?
No, it's hard to say specifically because we don't have the architect's drawings, we don't have all those pieces to it. But in our basic discussions, that building is bigger, so I think there would be some additional costs for utilities. But from what we've talked about and thought through, we don't see that it would be enough to actually make a difference in what we do to support our current buildings and everything else. The 5-year capital plan would still continue as approved by the board, and that would continue. That would not stop. Those funding sources are still coming. And again, we do believe with TESA we're going to see additional funds coming in to the school system. We just don't know all the rules for that just yet, but we do think that we would be okay, but again, without having to go back out to city council to ask for funds, and we wouldn't have to sacrifice, I don't think, anything that we do currently in our schools.
Okay.
That's from discussions that we've had as staff.
Did you have something?
No, go ahead.
To me, my biggest issue is the funding, because in all reality, we're guessing. We had We had these folks come in a year ago with Upton. I think they did a one-day walkthrough right when we were rushing towards, not we, but the city council was rushing towards getting this back on the agenda. I was at that meeting. I remember that some of the city council members were surprised that somebody sent an architect to the property without walking through certain things. We don't have any real numbers in this. And this is a wish list, kind of a brainstorming process of things that we could potentially be in there, but I don't think this wish list was prepared when Upton went and took a look at the property. So these numbers could be significantly higher or significantly lower than what it is. Do I think that this is a property that could really benefit the school? Absolutely. I think that there's a great deal of uses either for the school or for the city. I think the price point on it's probably a great looking just from an investment property. And if the city buys it, I'm sure that they'll have a no strings attached ability to resell it if they decide they're not going to use it, and that'd be a great, maybe make some money out of it. That's fine. And I think that if the city or the school board buys it, we should have that same right. But I don't feel near as comfortable signing off on the funding side of this. We haven't even been able to walk it through it. Upton hasn't been in there as far as I know, other than the one day that they went through there. And that to me is very difficult for me to stomach, because we've got these numbers, and when we scratch through a $1.2 to $2 million initial thing to get the doors open, that's a big spread. And then you've got another $1 million potentially to get some of these wish list items on. We're now potentially at $3 million. Then you've got an acquisition cost, another $700 on top of that. We're now above the PI bond funds on the top end. And then we also have all these other properties that we're going to intend to repurpose. And so to me, I just think it's prudent for us to maybe divide this resolution or vote into two separate motions. Maybe one being, do we support the acquisition of the property by the city? Period. End of sentence. And then, a second discussion on whether we fund it, whether they fund it, whether we revisit this at a later time once we've had the opportunity to get in and have better drawings and a better idea of the wish list, and maybe talk to some of the teachers in local schools and how they can, what they might need. Or whether we could co-op with the city to put maybe some city tax office or something in there that would cut down on some of those development costs. We can brainstorm on it, but those are just my concerns.
I'm just wondering, bouncing off of what you're saying. So it sounds like maybe having a commitment from the board that we would be interested in that building contingent on certain information once it becomes available. Is that what you're...
So what I did yesterday, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just making sure I was understanding what you were saying.
Right around the time that Dr. Dyer had sent out his email, I kind of typed up a potential thing for us to look at last night. And did you guys get a copy of that? And to me, that was intended to be vote one. Do we support the acquisition of the property? Yes. And there's a whole lot of things we could potentially do with it, but I don't feel comfortable committing a barter with the Deming Center. We don't know. I don't commit to funding it. I don't, So I think that we could do one vote on that. We'd love to look at it. We'd love the city to, get involved in it, and then let us open our doors. Let's get up and down here. Let's, do some questioning, and let's move that along. But right now, we don't know whether Mr. Preston's going to, or the owner of the property is going to agree, or what terms he's going to put on. I think the city has asked us, and city manager's here, maybe he can address it, but I think the city's asked us if the property can be acquired, it is one of the potential uses to be used by the schools. And I think that's an easy question. We'd love to have it.
Are there other comments or suggestions around the proposals that we have.
I have one question, and I guess I could address it to Joe Fivas if that's
I'll bring
okay.
him up in a
You can bring him up? Okay.
I want to reiterate the point that, yes, we're going to, looking, if we do go through with this, yes, moving all the admin there, but there's other purposes for this building. Teacher, staff support, education, instructional areas. Then also, how do we use this building? And that could be, that's student related. And so I think we need to make sure that there's an understanding that, yes, we're looking at, we're thinking about the teachers and the students in this. And also, and like we said, this does not impact the original capital plan that was put in place. Correct? I mean,
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. No, I agree 100%. There is a need for office space. That's just bottom line there. But I think in that Raider Drive building and in this building too, you can definitely have an impact and will have an impact for students and staff in various ways. We just have to get into the weeds of that and figure out where those spaces are and, as mentioned, what the costs are to go with those pieces.
Okay, if you will, the City Council asked, part of their proposal to us was for Dr. Dyer and the City Manager, Joe Fivas, to work together and facilitate the details. And so I'm going to bring Joe Fivas up and have him provide some thoughts that they have, suggestions, if you will. And then we'll open it up for questions to him as well.
Thank you very much. My goal is actually not to be part of your dialogue and discussion. I just wanted to make sure you guys here and available for any questions. We've had engineers and architects, and we know a decent amount about the building. Hal was a part of that, not all of it, but a part of that. And I think there was a lot of honesty here. I think board member Chris McKay and I know Russell and I know Matt have said some things that I would probably agree with as far as essentially making sure that we do it right and we have as much information as we need. But I'm here mostly just to answer questions. I do have this that I want to just share. This is not from. Okay. These are just some suggested discussion points. I think is the best thing. Not from the city council. Yeah, I'm not doing very good at passing out. Well, this is not from the city council. These are just some things that we've heard. We've interviewed some staff members and some council that as you continue your dialogue, you guys are going to continue to talk about this and figure this out. I just wanted to. These are some of the themes that we've heard. We're not asking you to accept these. We're not asking you to adopt these. We're not asking you to do anything other than to be aware that these are questions that have been raised that could be raised in the future. The first one, and this is just a statement of what we talked. I think what the conversation is I think all your buildings, I guess I'm not sure all, but I'm pretty confident, is that the city owns with the sole use and benefit of the property of Cleveland City Schools, which means you get to use it, and as long as you're using it for city school purposes, it's yours. And my guess is that if it reverted away from those city school purposes, it would probably revert back. I'm not sure. But basically, just stating the obvious that there was a question, I think, the last time we talked about who owns it, and I think we would say just keep it consistent with how we had done it before. And I think we've heard that as far as your renovations, and I haven't heard anything different, that you guys would be responsible for there, so I'm just stating the obvious in bullet point 2. Number 3 is that if you decided to sell a portion of the property, revert back to the city control. Obviously, making the city schools whole. If there was some money that you put in, and I'm not suggesting that or heading in that direction, is obviously if you ever want to need to be made whole. But again, this is just a discussion point. I think there's a concern that, well, you do this, and then on the 4th one, and then what capital project is next in the next year that the council isn't aware of. And I think that there's just some language to just make them feel comfortable that you're not going to do this project and then something. And I've heard that from staff and also. So again, just a discussion point. And then probably the only one I personally care about is that when we have community events, that if and when this comes into your control, is that we can use the parking for events at the Greenway Park. And I know that probably would never be an issue, but I put it out there. So happy to answer any questions on that. Happy to answer any questions that you may have on the building, and just try to be helpful in your process. I really don't want to be a part of your deliberations and dialogue, because I think you guys have it well under control. But just here as a resource and try to be helpful.
You have a question?
Yeah, my question is, I think it's pretty clear that we're definitely interested in the building, and would clear things up with the city. But I'm wondering, some of the city council members have some reservations about the building, and have we answered those reservations? Is there any questions that you think they would have that we could clear up?
I think some of them are not associated with the use of the school. I don't think that that's for some of them. I think some of the points on this address some of the other concerns. I think that there's some concerns out there that are not related to the school or your use or the benefit. It's more principally associated. But I think as an overall, because here's the thing is right now we have nothing in writing, nothing between us, no one, and I think there's this question of there's a lot of words, a lot of discussion, but there's nothing in writing on what this is. The closer you get things in writing, I think that people start feeling more comfortable that all the loose ends have been touched. And Dr. Dyer and I talked yesterday about his document, and I'm supportive of what he put forward. But I think that's the reservation is the unknown of what do we not know, what do we not have in writing as we move that process down the road.
What are we really being offered?
What's that?
What are we really being offered? That is.
What's in the totality of what's this transaction all look like?
Right.
Where does this all end up? And I think people start looking at it and saying, yeah. So I think that just like as you are all elected officials, sometimes you don't like to deal with unknowns or make commitments on things that you don't know. And I think that's where you're at, that's where we're at. And I think that this is a helpful dialogue. And I think Dr. Dyer putting some things down in paper, working on some things, I think that brings certainty to a lot of the questions. There's some questions that are outside of this, but I think that alleviates a lot of that is just trying to fill those blanks. And that's a long answer for a very easy question.
So, from the last city council meeting, I think the price was pretty set, and there was a vote that talked about getting a contract price or a contract set up with that price. Where are we at with that? Because what we don't want to do is vote on something here and then realize, that price is escalated. So where are we at with the contract?
It was delivered to them last week, and I have not had a formal response.
Okay. So that may be a concern for us as well.
I think it's a holiday week. We don't know who looked at what, all that stuff. I wouldn't qualify the lack of there, but it has been executed what the council wanted. But I would just be patient and wait. So I wouldn't qualify it as good or bad, as far as I understand.
Hey, Joe, can you touch on bullet point 4?
Yeah.
About the loan request.
I'll read it. City schools will not request any capital fund projects, including the purchase of land, architectural, geotechnical service from the city council until after July 26th, except for unseen structural issues with the school or natural disaster. I think there's a lack of information, and you guys have your study. It shows a number of smaller projects, school-related projects that you're working on. I think there needs to be an understanding, and I think this is, and again, this is a question of an unknown. It's not a question of intent or what's going to happen or what could happen. Is there an expansion of the high school coming? And Dr. Dyer assured me that this is not the case. So I'm not. Is that there's an expansion of the high school coming in the next year. And I think that those are some of the things that, with that, was trying to answer the question is, there isn't an unforeseen thing is that using this capital fund money that we get from the bonding is used to improve educational and city facilities from a capital standpoint is to do that, and then there is a more urgent educational need a month from now. Our budget, we want to have budget certainty like you do. Having something unforeseen, or not unforeseen, something that comes up a year from now for a capital project creates a finance or an issue for us. We probably can't borrow for the next 2 or 3 years anyway, and we have some other capital projects that we're working on. So I think we're trying to get budget clarity and certainty for the next couple of years. That's probably really the intent. Again, a longer answer than one of those. Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to tack on to that. I understand the uncertainty and wanting to kind of have that assurance. I don't feel comfortable making that kind of promise because I don't feel that I think there's too many unknowns from the school system. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. So I think it would be prudent for us to make that kind of promise, not knowing that we could hold that up. But there could be something come up that is unexpected.
And it says unforeseen.
Well, even if the purchase of land is identified as something we wouldn't ask for, we've shared our master plan with the city council outlining the need for a future school later down the road. But in the process, if some land becomes available for that school, that we're strapped for land in the city, and we don't have a lot of options when it comes for locations for schools. So if a piece of land is available, we want to be able to act on that. And so, again, that's if. It may not happen. But I think things like that would preclude me from feeling comfortable with making that kind of commitment.
These are discussion points.
Yeah, and I'm just sharing that.
We're not asking that. But who's going to pay for the piece of land?
Right.
And where's that money coming from?
I'll say I agree with you, Krista. And do we know when's the last time we actually went to City Council and asked for money?
The only money that I can go back and think through that we've asked for in the capital expenses go back to Kings Creek. I'm looking at Cindy on that too. We've not had an increase from city budget since I've been here, correct, except there were some funds that were increased by the city.
Our transfer has increased
Right.
twice since you've been here.
Right.
But it wasn't something we didn't ask for.
Right.
So do we have a time frame when was the last time we asked for money?
Limited bonds.
Bonding for Candy's Creek would have been the last time, so that would have been 2016.
2016?
So that's,
We've not, for capital projects, you used to go to ask for roofs, everything had to go to city council. Since the half-cent sales tax, since I've been here for 10 years, we have not addressed a school bus or a roof or any of the repairs to the buildings in that 10 years. Everything has come through the operating capital of the school system and through sales tax. And that's how we've not had to ask for those type of things at this point.
so it sounds like it's been estimated 7 years, and so we would then tackle in 3 years. That seems a little too strict for my taste. So, just my thoughts.
Yeah, it seems like being able to access property if something became available at a really good deal, we should be able to take.
We're not debating it. We're not even
Okay.
saying this is there. Is you're going to have this question come up.
Right. Yeah, I think her point was well made, that I think the city would want to take advantage of something like that if it came available.
Right.
Right.
So,
And that's-
But where's the money going to come from? You're spending your money on this great project potentially. Where does that come from?
Figure it out.
That is the concern.
any other questions, comments, concerns?
I would say this. I think that when I read some of what, the draft email I think Mr. Dyer sent over there, something similar to what was said a few minutes ago, there were some of those things I'm like, well, hold on a sec. That just doesn't sit well with me, whatever those things are. So I think whatever we decide on today should be written, back to his point of being clearly articulated message in words, and be very, very cautious of standing up in front of a microphone speaking on behalf of the board about things that we've not committed to. And so, to me, I think that we're almost at a point here in this where we have a motion with clearly articulated language that can be handed to the city council and say, here's the position of the school board. That would be my proposal.
Any other, I want to make sure we don't have any questions or concerns before we move forward.
I was just going to tack on to what Matt had said earlier. I like the idea of separating out and having two different motions of are we supportive, and then what is our level of comfort with financial commitment, kind of separated out as two different motions so that we're not dismissing our interest if there is concerns about finance.
So, all questions good? Concerns? Okay, so Matt, do you want to read your, make a motion and read your motion?
Before I spend what will take me a long time to read this with my glasses on, did everyone get a chance to read this? And I'll read it out in a second, but does anyone have a major issue with the language? Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and read it, and you guys can read along. This was proposed language. CCS School Board has an interest in the property as it has the potential to serve the school system in various capacities, including administrative office, professional development, student learning centers, or shared spaces with the city and other entities. However, considering the limited time to evaluate the project, CCS does not have a clear understanding of the development cost or use of the property, as well as the potential use of properties that may become vacant if the administrative office is consolidated into the Raider Drive building. Additional discussion would be necessary once further investigation of the property, including architectural drawings and construction costs, can occur before any final plans or commitments could be made. However, the school board supports the acquisition of the property by the city for further discussion and evaluation. That would be my motion.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Once? Got a second. All right, so let's talk about the motion. Any commentary that you have?
Let me answer that. If we're going to do a split, then we might tweak some of that language so that we can divide out the funding side of it and make it a more concise statement. Is that
Yeah, I think
thoughtful?
some statement in there that we would be willing to commit to the costs and such pending further investigation or more information or contingent. I mean, we don't buy a house without it being contingent on an inspection. So, that kind of information would be helpful before if we wanted to separate those things out.
I agree. I mean, and we don't know what the contract they've got and what kind of due diligence period they've built in, if any, and so is there a...
So let's work through making that change.
Okay.
While we're all here, so.
All right. First sentence sounds fine to me. Somebody jump in.
I have a question about that CCS does not have a clear understanding of the development cost. True. But what about the use of this property?
Yeah, that was my question.
What did you mean?
The reason I meant is this is a wish list.
Right.
We don't know what of these items may or may not go in that property, what we may or may not know. We don't know the full scope of what would go in there, and in order for us to get probably a reasonably accurate architectural bid, we would need to
Something more
narrow this down a little bit to practical projects that we want. I wanted this to be as broad as it could be, is my intent.
I think where the change may need to happen is that additional discussions would be necessary, maybe tweaking that to indicate that there is interest in financial obligations pending more information or contingent on this work that might need to be done.
Yeah, how do we reword that?
separate this part from this part.
Just rephrase the
What if we said something to the effect of, and I'll say this and I'll forget how I phrase it, so somebody help me. But while the city is open to contributing to the acquisition of the property, additional discussion would be necessary for determining something of that nature.
Did you mean the school system?
The school system. What did I say?
City council.
Sorry. But that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So it's, what did I say there?
CCS is open to contributing to acquisition
To contributing to the acquisition cost of the property, comma, additional discussions would be necessary.
Or more information or something.
More information would be necessary to determine the full scope of that contribution. Is that fair?
Okay.
Did you get that, Andrew? You'd be good if you did. We'll have a read it back.
Yeah, we'll rewrite. Yeah.
And then the rest of that, and then we leave the last sentence, however we support.
And while Andrew is writing that up for us, is there anything that we want to include a part of that from the suggested conditions that the buyers provided us?
My thoughts, if I jump in, some of these, if I'm hearing him right, I mean, these are all, some of them are common sense. I mean, they're part of what we would go back through the discussion. Again, fees and renovations, well, that's what we need to look into and figure out what we want to do. Number one's fine, number two's fine, but I don't think we need to necessarily include that. I think that those are...
Where did the suggested conditions come from? Did they come from the city council, or did you write those?
The council has, those are not city council. They're not connected to them at all. They are things of disconnected conversations that we may want to look at.
Okay. So we couldn't say that we would accept all of those conditions except the,
You don't have to do anything with it.
The fourth
I'm just
one.
delivering some information for you all
Uh-huh.
to think about.
right, like,
There's no expectation for you to take any action on any of it.
so everything looks good except the fourth one, and the only reservation we have is that if we wanted to build a building and property came up, we would want to be able to take advantage of that. You can't predict that.
My thoughts are in terms of these conditions, with the purpose of this original draft being to stay kind of general and just express our interest.
Right.
These seem to get very specific. I think these are things that we would definitely include in a more defined, here's our financial commitment kind of discussion. Because like number 2 would require us to have a little bit more information to take on that responsibility.
We basically want to say that we have a definite interest in the building, and we would certainly love to have further discussions, with the city.
And to me, the practical reality is we have a great relationship and a great partnership with the city and the city council members. We're all on the same team of getting the school system going in the direction we'd love for it to go, and supporting the teachers and everyone. I don't see any of these as being issues, but also, to your point, don't think we need to get into the weeds of, well, how many days a week do you get to use it for parking versus us having, that.
I don't think that's a problem.
No. I mean, the fence is up currently because there's a parking rub.
Well, I think Monday, I like where you're going with this. Monday, we will be, I'm sure, called in front of the city council to answer questions. Some of these points may come up. I need some direction, I think, from the board for when these questions come up, or others that I may not be able to answer on your behalf because the board may not take enough, a vote on, for example, number 4. What would be consensus, I guess, of the group of how you would want me to go about thinking through that? If I'm called up, or somebody's called up.
Let's do this. Since we have the motion on the floor, let's address that, and then we can come back to the suggested conditions. I brought that up for the clear purpose of having clarity on what we want to do.
Could you read it again with the motion?
Well,
You adjusted it.
We're going to have Andrea read it as soon as she's ready. Are you ready?
So my question for you, it was, removing additional discussion would be necessary once further investigation of the property, and inserting this statement. While CCS is open to acquisition cost of the property, further information is needed and requested.
Contributing to the acquisition cost of property.
So can you read the paragraph with that inserted now? If you don't mind, please.
CCS School Board has an interest in the property as it has the potential to serve the school system in various capacities, including an administrative office, professional development, student learning centers, or shared spaces with the city or other entities. However, considering the limited time to evaluate this project, CCS does not have a clear understanding of the development cost or use of this property, as well as the potential use of properties that may become vacant if the administrative office is consolidated into the Raider Drive building. While CCS is open to contributing to the acquisition cost of the property, more information needs to be requested, such as architectural drawings and construction costs that can occur before any final plans or commitments could be made. And then the last sentence is like the duplicate, how the school board supports the acquisition of the property.
So do you agree with the revisions that have been made? Okay, so we have a...
Yes, one second. When it says the acquisition, should we maybe insert acquisition and renovation?
And continued maintenance, whatever we're willing to consider as paying.
Yeah. With acquisition, it would be if there's that $759,000 and change cost.
Yeah.
But Nick, of course, that's up for you to decide. Do we want to put the word renovation in there as well?
To me, it just goes back to what this is. I mean, if we're going to take the property, we're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, to me, that's just a no-brainer. The question is, are we going to get it? and well, how much is it going to cost? Do we do it or not?
I think that it would be prudent to kind of break that down into acquisition costs and renovation, and even maybe in parentheses, in full or in part, to make sure there's a clarity that we'd be willing to consider that in full based on this information that we're able to, but we're not able to commit to that full amount at this point. Is that accurate? If not, we don't have to include that.
Did you handwrite that?
On 2 different pieces of paper.
Can I walk over there and take a look at what? Because I'm not good on listening. I'm better on.
I will be too.
I need to see that. I think there's somebody younger who would say that.
Acquisition cost of the property.
And call.
Renovation, acquisition and renovation costs.
So, Board, what are your thoughts about taking a 5-minute recess so we can solidify that and get it printed, and then everybody can see the same thing? You guys good with that?
That's good.
Any opposed to that? Okay, so let's take a 5-minute recess.
That's good.
All right, y'all, so we will resume our meeting, and I appreciate efforts and work here to provide some clarity. So we have on the screen a before and after, and you have been given, each board member is getting a handout as well, so if you will take some time to read that, and then we'll continue our discussion.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Let me add one word.
Right, so we have a word addition here, Cody.
Right after the word in whole or in part, comma, though would probably be a fair word to go in there. Though further discussion is necessary once.
I'm sorry, where?
In whole or in part.
The fourth line from the bottom.
Before further.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if
further discussion is.
I'm wondering if, and this is, I'm throwing this out there, if at the end of that same sentence it says cost can be included, if we need to add something about before specific financial commitment could be made or something like that. I don't know if that's necessary or if that's muddying the water.
Yeah, and that's the intent of that sentence as a whole, is just to say, that. Could it be reworded? Do we change included to considered?
Thoughts?
I have a question still about the use of the property. I know this is a wish list, but we know basically what we want to use it for. And, why would we plan to buy the building if we didn't know what we were going to use it for? Is that... As I said, I know, we brainstormed about all the things we could use it for, but basically we know we want it as a building for the Cleveland City Schools for basically offices.
Would it solve your concerns if we add the word specific use?
That might be.
I'm good with that.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
So where would you like that inserted? Or changed?
Okay, right there where it says CCS does not have a clear understanding of the development cost or specific
use
of the property. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then, just to make sure you were covered.
Yeah, I think the statement as it stands, I think is fine. I just was throwing that out there if we needed further clarity on that. But if nobody else has a problem with how it's currently stated, I think it works.
Are there any other adjustments that we want to consider?
Wait, okay. CCS is open to contributing to the acquisition renovation costs in whole or part, though further discussion is necessary once investigation of the property can be included. Okay, got it. I'm good. All right. Okay.
What about where it says CSS does not have a clear understanding of the development cost? What about it says CCS needs a better understanding of the development cost? Because we do have some understanding of the cost.
Maybe we could say a complete understanding.
I like that.
Okay.
I like that.
So instead of clear,
Needs a complete understanding.
He got
Or
it.
more complete understanding.
Look
Say
at the
more
screen.
complete.
Look at the screen and see if you like how Cody changed it.
Okay. The complete understanding, okay.
Back to my thesaurus.
Yeah.
It's thorough.
All right, so are there other changes that you would like to make?
What about does not yet have?
It's kind of,
I don't know.
yeah.
Okay. There are no further comments or suggestions, changes. We'll look at the motion that has been revised here on the screen. Give you a moment to read it. And I guess I should read it for record's sake. CCS School Board has an interest in the property as it has the potential to serve the school system in various capacities, including as an administrative office, professional development, student learning centers, or shared spaces with the city or other entities. However, considering the limited time to evaluate this project, CCS does not have a complete understanding of the development costs or specific use of this property, as well as the potential use of properties that may become vacant if the administrative office is consolidated into the Raider Drive building. For the purposes stated above, CCS is open to contributing to acquisition and renovation costs in whole or part, though further discussion is necessary once investigation of the property, including architectural drawings and construction costs, can be included. However, the school board supports the acquisition of the property by the city for further discussion and evaluation.
got one suggestion to consider. It is formalizing the name. The Cleveland City Schools Board of Education has an interest instead of CCS School Board. The rest of it can be School Board. That's kind of the informal name, but the formal name is the Cleveland City Schools Board of Education. That's the only thing I would throw out there.
Okay, and if we're going to tweak it again, I think in the first sentence, let's put Raider Drive property.
I thought that too, so I think that's a good idea. And I think we've got the specific address, the 775 Raider Drive building.
Okay.
Maybe this is just nothing, but I'd almost like to say that we have a definite interest, so they know right away. We're not trying to discourage them in any way, but we do want these questions answered.
Right there in the first sentence.
Yeah, the first sentence.
Has a definite interest.
Yes. A definite interest.
Are you on board with that? All right, so I'm going to give you a minute to read that again since we made some changes, and then we'll have discussion and move forward. All right, so we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. It's been revised. There on the screen. Are there any other discussion points that we need or changes that we need to make? All right, so all in favor of the motion presented on the screen for delivery to Cleveland City Council, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 100% yes. All right. All right, so the next thing we want to talk about is providing some clarity for the suggested conditions that city manager provided us. In the event that those questions come up, we have direction from the board. So let's start the discussion there, and let's do it by bullet point. Start with bullet point 1, then 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. The first bullet point is the city will own the 775 Raider Drive with the sole use and benefit of the property for CCS. The City Council would need to approve any additional uses or users of the building.
To me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would like to, if that's going to be something we have as a formal position, then I'd like to say something in the lines of, in accordance with other properties of the school system, or in line with, to show that we're interested in this being treated like any other of our properties that we don't actually own, that we have on behalf of, that the city owns on behalf of the school system. I'm a bit concerned about the second sentence about any additional uses or users of the building. If that's tied to our other facilities and that's what we have in our other agreements, then so be it. But that seems a bit vague in general and quite potentially limiting in what we could use our facility for.
And I also think it's incorporated a little bit into our statement that that's part of our investigation, but we are considering third parties. We are considering a co-op with the city. There's a plethora of things we could do in there.
We're not,
I don't have it on me, but the deed, they have our deeds, I've read that several times. Our deed has no restrictions. It just says for the use and benefit, I think it says the benefit or use of the Cleveland City Board of Education. And it does not restrict how y'all choose to use it. It doesn't put any...
For example, BCPEF had office in our other complex that we had in our annex building up Lee Highway for a while. So that was something that our board chose to do at that point in time. Didn't go to the city council for approval.
The center was actually renovated with the idea, this is 20 years ago, but there's a space at the top of the Denning Center that was going to be rented out to another entity. At that time, it never happened, but so that was actually renovated and all for that purpose too. So there is no restriction. Typically, in our deeds, there's no restriction to you.
So we want to follow, what I'm here is follow the current language of our previous deeds.
And scratch that second sentence.
And maybe even the word sold.
I think it, however it's worded in our current deeds, I think we should mimic that and recognize that it is the request of the, it's owned by the city. I'm just not comfortable with that second sentence.
So you want to take out the sole use because it said that no one else could use it then?
Well, it's the second sentence that I'm more. If the wording of our current deeds say sole use, then so be it. But however it's currently worded.
So if we can get a copy of one of our deeds, that would be helpful before our Monday meeting, and we can distribute that to the whole board. That'd be awesome.
And if these are simply talking points that they're asking about, I think that probably the appropriate response is how we've done the other properties is how we'd be open to doing this. Period. I don't think that's I think they're quoting that as being the language they use in the deed. It's just however we did the old ones is how we're doing this one, and I don't think we need to get in the weeds on that.
And I do want to,
just like other properties.
Yeah, I do want to this is not from city council. This is just staff talking points, and I just want to make sure we're clear on whoever's called us to speak.
Right.
And I think, I'm sorry.
Define the verbiage for they use.
I think it's the same as we've done with all the others. And fees and renovations we talk about in there. We just need to look into it, but we take it. We're going to do it.
All right. So the third point, we talked about the first two. If CCS decides to sell all or a portion of this property, will revert back to the control of the city.
I think Mr. Five has added to that and making the school system whole. I think having that understanding, verbalized or in writing or whatever, would be warranted.
Yeah.
I think that would be the kind of assumption that wouldn't hurt.
No, I think to that point, because if we go in and we're talking 10 years down the road and we've done $5 million investment in the property, we're not going to give it away. We're going to get our money back. But,
all right, so I'm going to skip the fourth one and come back. Let's go to the fifth one. The city reserves the right to use the parking in this area for community events with 2-week notice to the Cleveland City Schools. Everybody's good with that?
to me, it's a good part. Can that be abused Weekdays would be an issue more than weekends.
All right, and so the fourth one, CCS will not request any capital project funds, including the purchase of land, architectural services, geotechnical services from the City Council until after July 1, 2026, except for unforeseen structural issues of a school or natural disaster that require city funding. Thoughts on that?
I would answer that by saying I think you need to get back to the board and have that talk. Because that's a mouthful to get lost on and a major commitment that we're too early in the stance to.
I don't feel it's a realistic request.
No, I agree.
And I would never commit to denying our students of something that they need without being able, that's just not reasonable.
Say we'll discuss it with the city, any issues, any capital fund projects that come up, we will be open to discussion, something like that.
I'd say all of us are with the city on encouraging growth and development and industry coming in, but with that comes families and children, and we have to take care of them. So I don't think we can make a guarantee like that.
I would also want to remind them that we have shared our master plan, our capital master plan, so they are aware of our upcoming needs. We also make it publicly available our 5-year capital plan, our annual facilities plan. Everybody knows how we planned out, how we plan to spend our money, and we're not anticipating. There's too many forward plans to say that we would spring something anticipated on them unexpectedly.
So could we just say that any capital project funds will be discussed with the city? Just saying, before making any commitments.
So I think what we were wanting to do is just clarify, and I think for me the best answer is we just need to take that back to the board and then leave it at that. Does that make sense? Everybody in favor of that? This is not something we need to vote on. We just want to make sure that we're clear on where we stand on each of these points provided to us. Okay? All right. Anything else related to 775 Raider Drive that we need to discuss?
We'll know later. If there's access to the property at some point, that now that we've gotten this done, that's somewhat of a moot issue.
Do you feel comfortable, Dr. Dyer, that you have the information you need to field the types of questions you anticipate during that meeting?
I think so. I think we're in a good spot. I think I understand kind of I understand the consensus of the board and what we want to do and what we need to look at. And we'll have to come back and look at those hard costs once they're available. One thing that Hal and I discussed during the recess was the fact that some of these systems we won't be able to test until they're fully on, which we don't know when that could take place. If you're looking at the chillers, you need the water flowing through them and so forth. So that's a piece that just has to wait until some point further down the road. But that's where when you want actual costs, that's when that will come forward, when engineers and so forth can get in there and do that. And I don't know when that would take place, but that's something we continue to think through. But I think we're good on Monday. The City Council work sessions at 1 o'clock on Monday at their chambers, and then 3 o'clock will be the voting. And I would encourage just anyone who can be there to be there and to participate as you can.
So if they start throwing things out there as other options that we haven't discussed, you would just be referring it, that's something I'll have to bring up with you.
If I am asked, then yes, that's exactly would be my answer is I can't make a promise that the board's not taking action on.
And really that's everybody's stance, really, because we don't operate individually, we operate as a body. So just want to remind everybody that. Right.
But I do think we're in a good place. I feel good.
If there's no further discussions or questions, it's 9:56, and we will declare this special session ended.